I came to Penn Law School as a student in the fall of 1950. The dean was Owen J. Roberts, who founded Montgomery, McCracken, Walker, and Rhodes, the firm I later joined in 1956. He served as dean of the law school without compensation. 1950 to 51 was his last year as dean, and he taught us torts. Taught it straight out, the first semester, straight out of Prosser's handbook. I remember quite vividly his telling us that he had been asked to serve as a judge at the Nuremberg trials, the American judge, and he turned it down, and he gave us as his reason that the prosecution, knowing what evidence it had to convict, drew up the law as to how much evidence it needed to convict. And he said he couldn't in good conscience, I always remember this phrase, sit up in the bench and put the chancellor's thumbprint on that kind of procedure. Well, he said he would have given a drumhead court-martial to the Nazi leaders. I think he was wrong in that because the German people needed to know what their leaders had done, but that's what he said. Interestingly, Paul Mishkin was a first-year teacher at that time, and Leo Levin told me years ago, a story confirmed to me later by Paul, that the faculty divided on whether Paul should be invited to join the faculty here, and Dean Roberts voted against hiring Paul, but the faculty overruled him, and he went to the phone and invited Paul to join the faculty. At the end of Paul's first year, Dean Roberts invited the faculty out for dinner at his farm in Chester County, and he asked Paul to step out on the porch with him, and he told Paul the story as to how he had opposed his hiring. And he had said to the faculty, "That boy will never make a law teacher." And then he said to Paul, "Paul, I was wrong," which I thought was very big of the man. I also, when I was articles editor of the Law Review, worked with George Wharton Pepper, a very distinguished graduate of the law school, writing a memoir about which we published about his days in the law school around the turn of the century. He didn't summon me down to his office at Pepper Hamilton. He came out to see me, which was a mark of the man. He wore a little wing collar and addressed me as my dear O'Neill. And he told an interesting story. In those days, the law school was strictly on the lecture system. So these young students decided, why should they go to class? They would simply hire an amanuensis to go in and take notes of the lectures, and then they'd read them later. So they hired a fellow, and each day they would appear at the end of the class day and collect his notes. And they couldn't understand why he was drunk at the end of every day when he'd been sitting in the classroom every day. And then they noticed that he was a very natty dresser. And he would always have a boutonniere in his lapel button. And of course he would, during the day, go down and sniff his boutonniere, and that's where he was getting the hooch from a bottle in his pocket. I also remember at the law school, I think it was the year after I got out, clerking for Judge Goodrich, and I heard Senator Pepper introduce, in the great hall upstairs, introduce Learned Hand. And he got up and said, "I am supposed to introduce Learned Hand to this assemblage." And he looked around at the people attending and said, "Good God," and sat down. The final story I have to tell is about Professor Ned Keady. Before I got the clerkship with Judge Goodrich on the Third Circuit, which led the next year to the clerkship with Justice Burton on the Supreme Court. I was going to go, I think, on a Fulbright, but some sort of scholarship to France. And Professor Keaty took me aside and gave me some fatherly advice. He told me that the best way to learn French was to acquire a French pillow. Those are my stories of the law school. Make the most of your education here. If you're going to be a trial lawyer, always treat your opponent with courtesy. Be a professional. It's not a war. Earn the trust of the court. That's about all I can say right now. I could spend hours talking about that subject.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.
Right. Thank you.